And to begin the hour, why some men and some women fear commitment is on his mind. Our resident couples counselor and sex therapist, Dr. David McKenzie, gives us his perspective on why some people sprint for the hills at the mere idea of spending the rest of their lives committed to only one person. No more freedom or one sex partner is not their idea of happily ever after. Next. Once a month or so, we invite our resident couples counselor and sex therapist, Dr. David McKenzie, to join us in Studio 4 to talk about women and men who are in hetero or same-sex intimate relationships. This hour, fear of commitment is on his agenda. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. David McKenzie back to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Hi, Fanny.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, commitment. Someone told me once, I think it was a top psychologist in California or someplace like that, that commitment was actually freeing. If you could actually commit, it will free you up.
To some degree, commitment, of course, also involves limitations on what you can do. You're no longer just a free agent to go out, and it depends on what the couple has negotiated in their relationship. Couples will come to me and they'll be in a common law relationship and say, oh, well, actually, we're single, we're not married yet. So there's a statistic that came out recently showing that women now are rising in terms of being single. I'd want to tease out that statistic. Statistics can lie and be deceiving, and I'd like to know what they mean by single. But a lot of couples will be in serial monogamous relationships, exclusive relationships. They'll end after 5 or 6 years, and then they'll go on to the next one. But they can say, never been married. So, yeah.
Get it. So it's more marriage they're saying no to than commitment.
No,
in a sense, no?
Well, yeah, I think that's more it. I think what's happening is seems to be, it appears to be a rise on women being afraid of commitment as well. I just think women with more economic freedom are simply rising to the level where males are. Males have traditionally been rather hesitant, it seems, at commitment. And I think women, now that they have more economic freedom, are the same.
Sure. Well, someone said, Mo on Rock 101, who does all the Hollywood gossip, she said, mentioning marriage to George Clooney is like firing a starter pistol behind Secretariat. Like, he's a goner, so look out. And yet he seems to be in all these fab relationships and all of that, but he doesn't want to be in them for life, or maybe he does. Maybe you always hear things like, one day she'll get him, someone will get him. You know, and the whole get idea is kind of silly.
There is a minority of people, and I want to emphasize a small minority, who cannot be in long-term relationships. They either have an attachment disorder or a borderline personality disorder. What's so typical of that is someone who goes madly in love with somebody, you're the love of my life, and by 4 or 5 weeks they've already shut down on them, finding fault with them, and they leave the relationship. That is a disorder that is difficult to deal with. But I think we're talking about a much broader trend in our culture. We have to remember as well that we live in a throwaway culture. My wife, in fact, in Human Resources, has talked about young people coming in and they want to rise to the top without working out in the mailroom for a while. There's this sense in which they'll have 10 careers in their life, whereas in our generation, we maybe had at the most 2 or 3 careers. We may change jobs within those careers, but it's really we're committed to 1 or 2 companies.
Well, we all have more freedom, but I'm suspecting if you have a really good relationship, freedom is part of it. Freedom within the relationship. I mean, you don't want to marry your father or your mother who tells you what to do. You want somebody who says, I'm a human and you're a human, we love each other madly, but you do whatever you want with a little compromise.
Oh, of course. You mentioned at the beginning of the interview the psychologist who said actually commitment frees you up. I wanted to come to the other side of that, and that is true. There is an element in which, oh, thank God, I don't have to cruise the bars anymore. I don't have to sleep with all these men that I don't want to sleep with in order to win them. So there is that kind of freedom. One of the interesting things is couples who meet each other in the teen or high school years and marry, by the time they've been in that relationship, 15 years or more, there is this common feeling in both genders of, oh my goodness, what's it like to be with another person? What's it like to have sex with another person? And if that is not navigated well, it can hurt a relationship severely.
And I'm doing a show tomorrow on why men lie.
Okay.
It's a novel.
Yeah.
So, but
women lie too.
I know, but throughout the novel there is this thing, you know, this thread that runs through about why men lie, and
Yes.
it's excellent. It's Lyndon McIntyre.
Okay.
It's really good. But how about that? You two people come together, male or female, and say, I'm in your park. I'm with you for life. But they'll never marry you. Or they say they're with you for life. I'm committed to this relationship. I'm committed to you. And they bolt.
But don't forget, we're now in a
circumstance?
No, we're in a post-Christian age in which having vows in public and so forth are not as important for Generation X and Y.
Sure.
I have a niece who's been in a long-term relationship for 30 years. They have 2 grown children. They've never had a formal marriage. And yet they're as married as any couple would be if they had a piece of paper.
And yet same-sex couples want to get married. And those of us who have been married say, don't need to.
But that, I think
why do you want to do that?
But that's another issue. I think that is a way of affirming same-sex relationships. It's one of the ways in which government and others can say this couple is legitimate.
Sure. Yeah. And some people are committed more to the relationship than they are to each other. They might not even be that happy, but they decided from the get-go, till death do us part. And they're staying in the relationship no matter what, for the children, for the neighbors, maybe for themselves, for the money, whatever it is. But they are totally committed to the relationship.
I've seen a few of those.
The idea of marriage, or to the marriage.
When I treat couples, I always say you need to see your marriage or your relationship as bigger than the 2 of you combined. And that everything you do has to be seen through the lens of, is this helpful for our relationship? It makes them a team and they come together. You mentioned in your introduction about how marriages are changing, that maybe to link up with somebody and have only one sex partner the rest of their lives is not in the mix for many couples. Marriage has changed, it's evolved. And so you'll have open marriages, you'll have couples who swing, you'll have couples who will have other friends who are same sex. They'll invite other people into their relationship.
Right.
A lot of our marriage is based on a Christianized notion of marriage. Secular marriage vows actually come out of the Book of Common Prayer, the Anglican Book of Common Prayer. They just leave God out.
Exactly, and then there's many other religions where polygamy is the thing, many wives.
Well, I don't know, Mormonism did away with that about 80 years or 100 years ago. But so I guess what I'm saying is that marriage has evolved and changed. And if we look at marriage only through a Christianized or a lens or a religious lens, then that couple is linked into that religious tradition that says, no, it's exclusive, you must never play outside of it.
Right.
And that's fine, I celebrate that.
But they've taken out some of those vows, like love, honor, and obey.
Oh, well,
the obey part's
the
gone.
church took those
Thank
out
goodness.
too.
Yeah, that's what I mean, that's good.
Interesting that Diana insisted on that word being in there when she married Charles.
Really?
Yeah,
She
she
did?
wanted to obey in there.
Obey?
Yeah.
Well, you know what happened to that.
Well,
It didn't work out all that
didn't work
well.
out that great.
No,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of anxiety for many people around commitment. Does that have something to do with how we were raised, with our mothers, our fathers? If we were raised by a mom and dad who were married forever, madly in love?
I would say that has a small impact, and parents shouldn't be blaming themselves if their children don't get into long-term relationships. I think if you have a child, a daughter especially, it affects women more than men. 70% of borderline personality disorder affects women, only 30% for men. If you have a child, for instance, that's in and out of relationships, cannot maintain long-term relationships, you might want to suggest they get some professional help for that. But the vast majority of the fear of commitment, I think, comes from a culture in which we don't want to be tied down. We don't want to be tied down to one job.
Right. No, I get it. Totally. Self-esteem? Have something to do with it? If you have high self-esteem, low self-esteem, good self-image, not so
only
good?
Only as it's linked to females having more economic freedom and power. So that you'll find women in our day in which, like I say, if you're not married by 25, you're a spinster or an old maid, their status and their economic survivability depended on marriage. Now you've got women in careers, medical doctors, doing all sorts of things, going to university, getting their doctorates.
Adopting children.
Exactly. And so it's a much different world.
Well, and the labels are gone. I don't think a woman who doesn't marry today is considered an old maid.
Absolutely
or
not.
a spinster. And a man who is a bachelor has always been honored,
Exactly.
pretty much. I mean, they go,
Exactly.
he's a bachelor,
I know.
never
I
been
know.
married.
I
But
know.
then my old aunties used to gossip, you know, he's never married. What do you think that is?
Yeah. I think, I'll be honest with you, some women have ended relationships and have come to see me for like a year and a half afterwards, once a month. I'll guide them through and they'll seek counsel on people they're dating. And if they come across a man who's 45 years of age and never been in a long-term relationship, never been committed in a relationship, I say you need to search that out more.
Right.
There's a reason why somebody by 45 has never been in a long-term relationship.
Or in any relationship.
Or in any
I mean,
relationship,
they've dated,
yeah.
but they've never been in a relationship.
Especially if they're still living with mother.
Well, you know, like the aunties, again, the old gossiping aunties would
Yeah.
say, I bet he's a homosexual.
Oh, no, no, no.
You know, but
Yeah.
but they did that
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the day,
Yeah.
and
Well-
not necessarily so at all.
Yeah.
Do you think people are asexual?
There's 1%
You're
who are-
straight, you're gay,
Yeah.
or you're just in the middle
Yeah.
and don't really care.
Yes. Kinsey identified, 2% of the population that was asexual. And there's now a society or a group that actually identifies as asexual. You can find them online.
I'm not straight, I'm not gay,
that's
I
right.
just don't really want to have sex
That's right.
with anyone. I'm just happy.
They will have sex, but they're not driven by it.
But
They
not
don't need
driven by it
No,
at all.
No. Yeah.
And you know, there used to be a thought that if you have a ring on your finger, you'll live happily ever after. It was, I think, called the Cinderella complex or something like that. But
Well-
if I get married, if somebody wants to marry me,
Yeah.
that's a
That's-
big thing.
But also that starts to speak to low self-esteem. They'll put up with anybody just to belong. The sexual revolution of the 60s and early 70s really was the death knell to the Christian notion of marriage. And all the church laws on marriage were made in the Middle Ages when people only lived an average of 35 years of age. So if you had a bad marriage, you just had to say, well, hang on, heaven's around the corner.
The mere idea you're going to be with the same person
For 60, 70
for
years?
60, 70, 80 years. Oh,
Yeah.
80 would be a lot.
Be 100 years
Even
old.
60 years, you'd be 100 years old, crocking around. Oh, dear. David McKenzie, our guest, he is a couples counselor and a sex therapist. We'll come back. Dr. David McKenzie, our guest, he's a couples counselor and a sex therapist, a theologian, former prison chaplain,
Priest.
all of that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And you've seen a lot of changes over the years,
I have.
as we all have.
Yes.
Sometimes men say they're committed, or women say they're committed, until somebody says, well then, make a commitment. Put a diamond on my finger, or set a wedding date, and then, as I said, firing a starter pistol behind Secretariat,
Yeah.
I'm gone.
You'll find more.
If I'm telling the world that I'm
You'll find more women
Committed.
wanting that, especially when they get to reproductive threshold around 27, 28.
Sure.
They're wanting some legal protection, although in our country, 2 years you are
Right.
seen as married. They're wanting some sense in which their child's raised in a stable home life. They want to be able to have the same last name, perhaps, or a compound name. So there's an element of stability there.
What about getting married for the wrong reasons?
Done all the time.
Your pressure from your family.
Yeah.
I'm a certain age, I better marry someone,
Yeah.
not madly in love with the someone, just better get there.
Yeah, that actually happened in my first marriage, in which my ex-wife and I, whom were very good friends, we've raised our children together and I think done a good job. But it come to the point in our 3-year courtship in which we were having real doubts about marrying, but there was so much pressure. Mom and Dad were driving from BC to Ontario, and it was all there, and we just felt the pressure to get married, and we shouldn't have.
Right,
You
I know.
I'm
I've
very
heard
happy
that.
with the children I've got. I wouldn't
Or
trade them for anything.
You just happen to be the girl in his life, and it's time to get married, so he marries you.
Yeah, that's small town thinking, right?
Very
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
So men and sex and ego and feeling like a hunk and a real guy, you know, is that part of it at all? The fear of commitment?
No, I think it's like I say, I think the culture has a lot to do with it. We live in an age in which young people really do not expect to stay in their jobs. They don't expect to have 40-year careers. A lot of them don't even have pension plans. It's a
Right.
throwaway culture.
Sure.
And so it's a culture that speaks to that.
So in this day and age, in the throwaway culture, culture of immediacy,
Yeah.
what are some of the benefits of committing?
I'm happy you asked that question. Commitment, let me put it this way. We marry our emotional equal. We hook up with our emotional equal.
We do?
Yeah.
What does that mean, doctor?
Well, in imagotherapy, it says that we choose a partner at a subconscious level to heal deeper childhood wounds. We've talked about this at other times on your show. And so therefore, there's no such thing as a person who has real problems with intimacy hooking up with somebody with no problems of intimacy. You will hook up with somebody who has problems with intimacy. It may be expressed differently. That is the person you should be with. Every person you've been with in a long-term relationship, unless there's abuse or drug addiction, is the one that you will grow with, and that's the one you stay with.
Sure, your mirror. That's how you learn.
That's right.
He's afraid of commitment, you're afraid of commitment, and you're in a committed relationship,
you actually hold the key to each other's deep psychological healing. And what happens is couples will come to a place in which, whoa, if I'd known this, would I ever gotten married? That's precisely the growing edge of the relationship. That's where the sparks fly and where you're confronting those deep childhood issues. And if you just part, you're going to have to do it all over again in the next relationship.
Okay, so I get that. So fear of being abandoned, for instance. If you felt abandoned as a child, then you marry a man and you're afraid to
No, it's more
trust.
than that. No, you choose a partner who will trigger deep childhood pains.
Great.
Issues, no, it's meant to be. issues from your childhood. The real you comes out with your partner, not with the therapist, not with your kids, not with work buddies.
Okay.
And that's why I insist on seeing couples together, not separately. Because the real them comes out with each other, and you'll see sparks flying.
Sure. So if you were a child who never felt like anybody was taking care of you, truly,
you'll find somebody else with the same.
You find somebody else who has that same issue.
Yes, or who will abandon you, or who will not.
You felt abandoned as a kid, you felt abandoned as a kid, so now the two of you feel abandoned together.
That's right. Or it can be such that you'll find somebody who will abandon you and keep the repetition going, to repeat yeah. But don't despair, because that's exactly the person you need to be with. And when couples get into trouble, they say, well, let's get out of here. No, that's the precise time in which they grow the most.
Okay, so if you had a father who was a philanderer, for instance, never faithful to the ma.
Sure.
And so you pick those boys. You just do. To learn the lesson?
Well, it's actually an attachment. It's more about your relationship with your mother than your father. The father is actually secondary. So if you have a cold abandoning...
Whether you're male or female?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
If you have a cold abandoning, because the first person you ever fell in love with was your mother. And if that mother was not emotionally available for you, at a very pre-conscious level, you were profoundly hurt. So what happens is, you're not going to get hurt again. So you'll choose partners who will leave you, abandon you, be alcoholics, or you'll sabotage the intimacy at a certain point.
Okay, because it feels familiar.
Not only it feels familiar, but you're not going to get hurt again.
I see.
I'm going to marry somebody emotionally unavailable because I'm not going to get hurt again.
Right, and how do you help people who have been hurt in a relationship, past relationship?
It's more than that.
Dumped.
No, we choose relationships that will hurt us and dump us because we're reenacting childhood pain. And so I start the person on a road of encountering their inner child and working through that past pain.
Right, so that says to me it's important, if you're at that point,
Yep.
to work through it.
Yes, and get help if you need to.
Okay, or if it's a freedom thing, whatever. He says, guess what? I want to go to Europe. And she says, my husband isn't going to Europe without me. And he says, what are you talking about? You can go where you want, I'm going to go where I want.
Well, I would say the relation, if suddenly he drops that on her, things have not been talked about along the way.
Right.
You don't just drop something like that on a partner. Things have been happening along the way in which they're not communicating.
Sure, but often you hear it in relationships. Who are you to tell me what to do? I'm a grown-up.
Yeah.
You know, I love you madly, but I have a life and you have a life, and you've got one more dependent on the other.
Yeah. You'll often
That's never
find
good.
couples who come to the place where they finish raising their children, and you're constantly renegotiating your relationship. It's an active living covenant. And so when one gets married at 22, that's not the same covenant or agreement you have at 50. It's constantly being renegotiated.
And your role's being renegotiated.
Absolutely.
If you've been a stay-at-home mom, and now the children are gone, and your role was that, and he's still working or not, or he retires, and then there's the two of you.
I've just heard on
over
the radio,
the cornflakes.
Just heard on the radio this morning, there's a new stat out saying that more and more men are being house husbands while the wives go out to work, and it has to do with the bottom line.
And it does have to do with the bottom line often. If somebody is in a terrible relationship, they stay because they have no money and they have no idea how to get out.
That's tragic.
That is tragic. But how do you get out if your option is to sleep in the street? It's tough.
Well, I mean, there is a safety net of social assistance, but nobody should be staying in an abusive relationship.
I totally agree.
And often the reason why women stay in there is either through battered wife syndrome or that they have a deep need to be abused.
Right. So the keys to staying committed. If you want to stay committed, like you made the commitment and you're having one of those days where you think, I didn't really know him at all.
Well, you will come to that. To remain human, we must remain unpredictable. And so you'll come to those places of saying, oh my God, do I want to be in this relationship? It's called communication. And when you finish communicating, you communicate some more.
Okay. Well, thanks for communicating with us all these years, because as you know, Studio 4 is ending.
I know, and I want to thank you for the 6 years of having me on here regularly, and it's been an absolute joy, and I wish you the best.
Well, I've learned a lot.
Oh, okay. Well, I have to
tell you.
Okay.
I perhaps learned more than you did. Who knows?
Thank you, Fanny.
Thank you. Dr. David McKenzie.